In this thing called you, Ernest Holmes states, you exist that divine feeling, fire, imagination, and creativity may be expressed through you. The Spirit comes to you with a new and fresh creativity. You need not ask what others have done or how they have done it. Be yourself and express the life as you find it. Never imitate. Trust the self. Find the self in God and God in the self. There is not a moment that God is not creating. We know this when we see a brand new bud on a rose bush, a bird, a baby bird in a nest, or we watch the beautiful sunsets that transpire here in Chico. Or we know this when we see the pictures, the incredible photographs that are being taken by the Hubble telephoto or telescope. I am constantly amazed by the creation that those pictures share with us. According to Genesis, God made us in his image. Well, if we believe that, and we know that God not only gave us a body similar to hers, but also the power and the ability to create. God was the original creator and gave each of us the gift to create. We need only look at the creative process chart located in the back of the Science of Mind text to understand that we are endowed with the power to create. The top of the chart is the spiritual plane. Everything begins here. At some point, we get an intuitive idea mentally, and imagination and inspiration take over at a mental and emotional level within us. Ultimately, we take action and experience the joy of creating. Often when we're learning about the creative process, we say seed, soil, plant. God gives us the seed through inspiration, through intuition, and inspires us with that seed, and we plant it in the soil. And ultimately the plant grows and becomes physical, becomes a new creation, and we see what we have done. While I believe that it is true, no one can take our creativity away from us, surely there are those who try. For example, from an early age, I loved to write. I had 5-year diaries that I kept track of everything in. I wrote short stories. I dabbled in poetry, but it wasn't my thing. As a junior in high school, I wrote a short story about a girl losing a boyfriend. I remember distinctly one of my statements was, and the tears ran down her face, rolled down her cheeks like the trails on the slopes where they skied in the winter. Now, I thought that was a pretty cool statement and very descriptive. And so did several of my girlfriends that I skied with. So I took my story to my English teacher and gave it to her. And I said, would you please, correct this or give me some suggestions, tell me what you think. And every day when I'd arrive in class, I'd anticipate that she'd give me back and tell me that I was on my way to being a great writer. I think it took her a couple of weeks as she handed me back the typed pages marked heavily in red ink and said, you girls always think you can write romance. Stick to your class assignments, Eileen, and someday you might learn how to write. I can still feel the shame and the rejection that I felt in my heart, as well as the sting that I was never going to be able to do what I wanted to do. I knew I wasn't good in art. I couldn't draw well. In college, I dabbled in oil painting and ceramics, but they never got my creative juices going like writing did. The ultimate product didn't seem perfect enough. It wasn't good enough. My creative spark, in essence, was doused. As an adult, I have often wondered what creative opportunities were lost to me because an insensitive adult took it upon herself to squash my artistic pursuits. What that woman did to me and others, perhaps you've experienced that as well, was insensitive and cruel. I think she committed a crime against my spirit. Now I realize that those are pretty strong words, but I believe that they are true ones. Because in my mind, the creative spark that leads to art in any form is not simply talent or skill. I believe that the creative spark, the creativity is holy, and that it is one of the most important elements of our humanness. I believe that the human spirit is blessed with extraordinary creativity. And it is through this creativity that some of the best elements of humanity emerge. When we take the risk to open ourselves to deeper and more challenging creativity, we become better and more spiritual centered people. On a side note, it took about 30 years for my desire to write to return. Let's reflect a moment on a connection between art and spirituality. In Rebecca Baggett's poem, God and the Artist's Colony, the author compares the fundamentalist God to the driving forces artists feel. She imagines that the artists in their rooms at the Artist's Colony, each of us moving, aching toward that private alleluia revelation. Yes. While she does not call the artistic drive religious, her comparison between religion and art is very clear. Artists have often struggled to understand their art in relationship to God. Some of the best art ever created has been religious art going back 1,000 years. Yet art has been in our modern culture to a large degree separated from religion. These days, few artists openly speak of their spiritual longing. And many religious leaders today have little positive to say about art or music unless to criticize it or to mock their values. Yet I believe art and religion are powerfully connected. One source that helped me to understand this connection was a book written over 40 years ago by the author Chaim Potok, who wrote the book entitled My Name is Asher Lev. Like so many of Potok's novels, this book invites us into a world unfamiliar to most of us, the world of conservative and religious Jews. Asher Lev is a Hasidic Jew born in Brooklyn shortly after World War II and the Holocaust. His father is a traveler who moves around the world trying to save other Jews from the terrible devastation like the 6 million that were killed in the Holocaust. His father, it is a serious business, and when Asher is born, it is assumed that he will follow in his father's footsteps. But instead, Asher discovers that he has a gift for art. Not just talent or skill, Asher is blessed, or maybe we should say cursed, with an extraordinary gift to draw and paint at a level unlike or much like the young Mozart's gift of music. The gift was unasked for, and in many ways, he had no desire to have it. His artistic ability made him suspect within his conservative religious community where he was born and raised. This was a community that did not appreciate his remarkable ability of creativity. Yet Asher could not deny the call to art. He knew his father didn't understand it. He felt pain for his mother, who tried to protect him and praise him and help him develop it without angering his father. He bore the taunts of his classmates. He did so because he could not deny the powerful force that was his artistic creativity. When a short period he gave up his art, it almost killed him. Only when he answered the call could he become whole and grow into his humanness. But it did not come without a horrific cost. Asher Lev, the artist, the creator, was torn asunder by the power of his artistic gift. He discovered how truly difficult it was in his world and in our world to understand and answer the call of creativity, particularly when everyone around him insists that what you are doing is wrong. Not only wrong, but maybe even evil. For here is where his story becomes something truly heart-rendering. When he has finally matured in his art, he begins to paint the story of his family and the suffering that they have gone through. Asher Lev, Hasidic Jew, found that he had to use the crucifixion as a metaphor in a series of paintings that featured the faces of his mother and father. For a Jew to use a symbol such as the cross was hateful or a curse. Yet Asher Lev knew he must answer the call to his truest self. And this truest self insisted on the crucifixion, one of the most powerful symbols of suffering as a metaphor. And in answering his call to his true self, he alienated those he loved the very most, his mother and his father. His call to creativity was fraught with pain as well as joy. Yet he found in answering it a connection to the life force that both creates and destroys. In other words, he began to truly understand God through his creativity. At the end of the book, he finds he has to leave his religious community, at least for a little while. Chaim Potok writes in the voice of Asher Lev, "I looked at my right hand, the hand with which I painted. There was power in this hand, power to create and power to destroy. There was in that hand demonic and the divine at the same time. The demonic and divine were two aspects of the same force. Creation was demonic and divine. Creativity was demonic and divine. Art was demonic and divine. I was demonic and divine," he said. Asher Lev paints good pictures and hurts people he loves. He then hears the voice of God reply, "Then be a great painter, Asher Lev. That will be the only justification for all the pain that you will cause. Journey with me, Asher. Paint the anguish of the world. Let people see the pain." Asher Lev does so, even though to answer the call of his heart is absolutely excruciating for him. Asher discovers that through his call to creativity, he becomes fully human and also fully connected to God. He learns that authentic art is not just always beautiful or easy. He learns that his spirit could only be whole when he lived his creativity. It was an incredibly powerful book. If you ever get the opportunity to read it, please do so. Once there were two scientists who traveled to India to present their theories to a respected Hindu sage. They were so eager and excited to meet him and to share their concepts. And after their travels and arrival at the monastery, they were taken into a small room. And in that small room were chairs and a table with a tea service. And finally, the sage entered the room. Without saying a word, he went over and grabbed the teapot and began to pour. And calmly, as he poured, the water flowed out of the cup and it kept flowing on the table and onto the floor. The scientists were surprised and wondered what he was doing and why he didn't stop. Finally, one of them said, "Your Holiness, the cup is already full." And he kept pouring. He continued to pour without looking up. He said, "As are your minds. Empty them and return, and then we will talk." When you can put down your wants and your fears, we begin the process of emptying ourselves out. It is a process of opening space for creation to happen within. If you've ever played a musical instrument, you know that they are hollow. For example, in essence, they are empty. If the flute, the trumpet, the French horn, the drum, if they were not hollow, if they were not empty, there would be no music. They could create none of that. We need to allow the emptiness within ourselves so that our special music, whatever the gift happens to be, can be seen, heard, and known. In a stanza from the poem, The Flute of Interior Time by Mark Nepo, he states, "If you are never empty, how can you know the fullness of your spirit?" That is what creativity truly is about. Knowing the spirit that lives within each and every one of us. After emptying ourselves, we need to face our fears. When I began to write again a few years ago, I created a covenant. One of my intentions was to release my fear that I wasn't good enough to write. And after working with a writing coach and doing a couple of fear to faith exercises, that old belief created when my English teacher told me to stop writing creatively was released. We can't let our fears, we can't let our fears interfere with what the direction is that we're going. We must name them and work at releasing them in a healthy way. Remember, fears are usually based on beliefs that are created when we were children, and they are not true. Fear fuels our negativity and our judgment thoughts. Let's say, for example, you're trying to learn how to paint. And so you go out and you look at the scenery and you set yourself up and you paint a mountainscape with a bird flying in it and trees and clouds in the sky. And you stand back after you've created it and you start to look at it. And all of a sudden you critique it. And through your mind, you stop and think, oh my gosh, the clouds aren't right. The sky's the wrong color. The tree is out of proportion. The bird isn't in the right place. And you criticize yourself for this creation that you have been guided to do. You allow your fears to control your creativity. And so you set aside the painting. You set aside this creative endeavor. And have any of you ever experienced that? Once we face our fears, it's time to lean in to our creativity. It's time to let go of our hiding place, or maybe I should say the gift that you're hiding. It's time to let go of. We each have many gifts to share. And so what I would like you to do right now, because I think we are a talented church, we are a talented center. And if you're on the chat, write in somebody else within the center that you know has a talent or a gift to give, a talent or a gift that they're great at. And we'll talk about those in a few minutes. Because if you were in church right now, I'd ask you to look around and start naming them out loud. My guess is you could name a lot of people within the church who are talented and have gifts to share. Liz George, for example, is a talented yoga teacher. Sandy Golke is a gifted painter. Linda and Robin George have the gift of service. I could continue, but I want you to get them on the chat so we can talk about them in a few minutes. All of us have the power to create within if we just lean in and explore the gifts we were born with. When we move to that state of leaning in, it is part of a wonder of exploring who we are and the gifts that we have. Think of the last time that someone said to you, "You're good at that. And how about, since you're so good at that, why don't you try this? I bet you'd be good at that too." There's a multitude of ways to say it, but the bottom line is lean in, explore something new, and be willing to risk doing something you've always wanted to try. You just might be surprised. Crystal, do we have a list yet that we can chat about? We'll get back to it. As we explore our creative gifts, it is important that we discover and pick a tribe of friends who are supportive and encouraging. Remember, Asher Lev was not encouraged by his family, by his school, or by his friends. I love my writing coach. She's so important to the development of my writing because she is never critical of what I do. She always, even in her workshops that she attends, she makes it very clear, no one is to criticize your writing. What she does or how she handles it is, what did you like about this person's writing? Or maybe what would you like to hear more of? She will make comments like, I want to hear more about the main character, or I like the way you said this or that. I once wrote a story about one of my dad's sweaters. She commented how she loved the way I hooked the reader with a sweater, a common piece of clothing. Because of her encouragement, I've been able to share my stories, and a couple of them have even been published. It is important that as we explore the creativity within, that we discover and develop a tribe of friends who are supportive and encourage our development as we test the waters of the new gifts and skills. As Asher Levi had to leave his community to practice his ability to create, we sometimes must leave behind those who do not believe and support in us. Now I'm going to take a look here because Crystal has sent me and said, I'm looking here. Maggie Brett is a gifted painter. Reverend Connie has a beautiful soul who helps many. Alice Burkett, Gail and her arts and crafts and sewing. Alice Burkart does lines dancing and shares that. Reverend Kathy plays the guitar. Love to hear her do it more. And there were a few more, but they're kind of cut off. But see, we all have talents within the church, and it's wonderful. So, Martin, let's go back and kind of summarize what we've done this morning talking about creativity. Martin Luther once said, "The Christian shoemaker does his duty not by putting crosses on the shoes, because God is interested in good craftsmanship." Whatever your passion may be, you have been called to work at it with all your heart. If you're an athlete, train so that your greatest talent shines. If you're a scholar or a scientist, commit to the discipline of divine creation. Artists should dance and paint and write and sing and play guitars and make music without fear of whomever is watching. And if your gift is of service, know that God embraces creation you bring to all that you do. Emma Curtis Hopkins once wrote, "All thought is first in mind." That thought you have about creating something new came from the divine. It was the seed that was planted within, and you heard it intuitively, you knew it spiritually, and you've been inspired. Isn't it time for you to create the space to let God shine through you? Isn't it time to make God look good and create? This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours. And so it is. We come to that time in our service